Be me. 24, tired, but functional. Third wave brain with fourth wave politics. Run a semi-popular feminist Instagram account where I post infographics with captions like, "Your trauma isn't his growth arc," and "Don't mistake softness for safety." People DM me for advice. One girl once called me emotionally literate and dangerously clear-eyed. I screenshotted that and saved it in a folder labeled proof. I know how to explain patriarchy to a room. I've done panels, podcasts, anti-harassment trainings. I've had men apologize to me just for existing. I've left dates over one wrong joke. So when I met Luca at a workshop on emotional labor and he said, "I think men weaponize kindness just to disarm critique," I felt my spine straighten. He gets it. He was tall in the kind way, not the looming kind. Wore rings and asked follow-up questions. Said things like, "Feminism is a relational practice." We talked after the event. For hours. About burnout and boundaries and the loneliness of always being the one who knows better. He messaged me that night. "I'm still thinking about what you said, Ree. Silence as control." It's been sitting with me in a good way. I almost screamed. No one ever sits with my thoughts. They run from them, or worse, mirror them back to me without knowing what they mean. But Luca? Luca was fluent. Feminist. Fluent. Focused. On our second date, I said I was tired of carrying the conversation, and he replied, "I want to co-hold this." Who says co-hold? He brought me a copy of Sarah Ahmed's Living a Feminist Life with annotations. His handwriting was small, precise. "This reminded me of the way you described your mother." Page 127. Highlighted. I felt like I'd manifested him. The kind of man who didn't interrupt. Who listened, then paused. Who didn't flirt with you, he witnessed you. He made me herbal tea. He corrected other men softly but firmly. He called Andrew Tate a symptom of culturally fatherless masculinity. I practically levitated. But something was off. Not wrong, just sideways. It started with little things. We'd be talking about something I had said on my platform, a post about unpaid emotional labor, or the way men use checking in as self-branding, and he'd say, "Yeah, I actually wrote something similar last year. Want me to show you?" And he always had it. In a Notion doc. Or buried in a Medium essay. Or as a half-finished Substack draft. He never interrupted me, but he always arrived after me, claiming he was already there. On date 4, I told him about a fight with my sister. How I was exhausted being the family therapist. How no one asked me how I was doing. He said, "You might want to reflect on how your emotional labor narrative is closing you off from reciprocal vulnerability." I froze. Not because he was wrong, but because he used my own language against me. He didn't comfort me. He assessed me. Like I was a case study in a gender seminar. Later that night, I lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering why I felt like I had to be smart to deserve being held. Why I couldn't just cry without giving footnotes. I posted something vague to my story. Sometimes the most exhausting man is the one who agrees with you on everything. He replied with a heart emoji and said, "See, this is the kind of nuance men need to hear more of." And I wanted to scream. Not because he didn't get it, but because he always got it. Too well. Too quickly. Like he was playing me in a game where he already knew all the rules. I went to brunch with my friend Raya the next day. Told her everything. She stirred her coffee and said, "He sounds perfect. But in the way you talk about perfection as a form of control." I blinked. She added, "When's the last time you felt like he made space for you to not be the feminist?" I couldn't answer. Because I couldn't remember. We didn't fight. That was the problem. Luca and I never fought, not in the way couples are supposed to. No raised voices. No slammed doors. No long, awkward silences where someone finally says, "Can we just talk?" No. Luca didn't do conflict. He did co-regulated communication. He did naming what's present in the room. One night I said, "Sometimes I feel like I'm performing emotional intelligence just to match you." He smiled, tender and maddening. "I feel that too. We're both shaped by overfunctioning." He said it like a compliment. I wanted to throw a fork at the wall. Instead, I just nodded. Like a good feminist. Like someone who knows that disrupting harmony is less righteous when the man already agrees with your critique. But I didn't feel understood. I felt dissolved. Every time I tried to name what was wrong, he named it with me. Gently. Eloquently. So there was never anything left to push against. It's easy to argue with a man who says you're being irrational. You get to slam the table. You get to be the voice of truth. You get to walk out knowing you were right. But what do you do with a man who says, I hear that. That's valid. I want to hold space for that. And then just keeps being the same? We went to a housewarming together. A mix of his friends and mine. Someone made a comment about how feminism is harder to date around. I braced myself, ready to step in. But Luca cut in first. He said, that's because most men never learn to hold the weight of female awareness. Everyone laughed like he had just delivered a TED Talk. The girls clinked their drinks and nodded. He looked at me like, did I do good? And I felt this icy wave run through me. Because he had said the right thing. But he'd taken my moment. It was my topic. My fight. My breath to hold and break. And he had stepped in like the feminist savior he promised not to be. Later that night, I tried to explain that to him. I said, I know you mean well, but sometimes it feels like you're performing feminism better than I can live it. He tilted his head. That's a heavy projection. I blinked. He added, do you want to unpack that? Unpack. Everything with him was a suitcase. Never just a feeling. Never just, I'm hurt, or please stop. It had to be a framework. A learning outcome. A conversation arc. I said nothing. He wrapped his arm around me like I was a scared child and whispered, you're safe here. And I wanted to scream, am I? Because I wasn't afraid of being hurt. I was afraid of disappearing under the weight of being so understood. He never doubted me. But he also never left space for me to be unsure, messy, or wrong. He mirrored everything I said. Until I wasn't sure if the reflection I was looking at was even mine. We never had a moment of tension that didn't resolve in theory. If I was angry, he validated it. If I pulled away, he named abandonment trauma. If I said, I'm overwhelmed, he said, that's a fair nervous system response. I didn't want a therapist. I wanted a man who could sit in silence with me and not try to translate it. One night I dreamt I was screaming at him full voice, chest breaking open, and he just nodded. Calmly. Kindly. Said, you're doing great. This rage is sacred. I woke up with my hands clenched into fists. I hadn't even yelled in the dream. That morning, I found one of his old posts. A Medium essay titled, Loving a Woman Who Knows More Than You. It was about me. He never said my name. But I knew. I was the difficult one. The wounded one. The feminist with so much power and so little trust. He called me a mirror of the masculine wound. I felt my stomach flip. Because I hadn't consented to being his case study. And suddenly, all those quiet validations didn't feel like empathy. They felt like control disguised as admiration. I closed the tab. Sat on the floor. Texted my friend Raya. How do you break up with someone who agrees with everything you say? She replied. You don't. You just stop believing them. Luca kept calling me safe. That was his favorite compliment. He'd say it with this dreamy look, like I was a space he could finally exhale into. Like my feminism had gifted him permission to be soft. You're the first woman who doesn't expect me to perform masculinity, he said once, tracing the inside of my wrist like it held a secret. You don't punish my gentleness. And I nodded. Because how do you explain to a man that even praise can feel like a trap? That even softness can suffocate if it's never questioned? That sometimes, the most exhausting thing in the world is being understood by someone who never lets you forget it. We were in his apartment the night I finally cracked. He'd made soup from scratch. Played a Sufjan Stevens playlist. Lit one of those overpriced soy candles that smell like eucalyptus and regret. I was sitting on the couch, staring at my phone, reading a DM from a follower who said, Your new posts feel filtered. Like you're being careful now. I felt sick. Because she was right. I had started second-guessing every caption. Every call-out. Every critique. I'd write something bold, then hear Luca's voice in my head. Do you think this language invites dialogue? Is this a rupture or an opening? Can you hold anger without alienating the other? He never told me what to post. Never once asked me to change. But I changed. I softened. rounded out the spikes, smoothed the sharp edges of my clarity until they felt more collaborative. That night, I said, I feel like I've become palatable. Luca sat next to me, wrapped a blanket around our legs. I know that feeling, he said. That's survival, love. Don't judge it. And I wanted to scream, I'm not surviving, I'm disappearing. Instead, I said nothing. The silence sat between us like furniture. I watched him sip soup. He asked how my day was. I said fine. Then I said it again, like I was trying to convince the room. Fine. He nodded. You've been holding a lot lately. I wanted to tell him I didn't want to be held. I wanted to throw the bowl against the wall and watch it break. Just to see if he'd stop me. Just to see if he'd say, what the fuck, instead of, that's a valid expression of overwhelm. But I didn't break the bowl. I just stood up, went to the bathroom, and stared at myself in the mirror. I didn't look angry. I looked edited. Like I'd been resized to fit inside a shape he'd always had ready. When I came back, he was reading a book I had recommended. One I hadn't even read yet. He looked up and said, you were right. Her analysis of female grief is groundbreaking. I sat down next to him. Quiet. And then I said, do you ever wonder what would happen if I just stopped being good at this? He blinked. What do you mean? If I stopped being the articulate one, the calm one, the mirror. If I got loud, sloppy, petty. If I let myself be angry without citing theory. If I just felt things without trying to make them teachable. He smiled softly. You'd still be safe with me. I stared at him. Because that wasn't what I needed. I didn't want to be safe. I wanted to be real. Even if that meant being difficult. Disagreeable. Unimpressive. But every time I tried, he wrapped it in theory. When I got quiet, he called it somatic withdrawal. When I pushed back, he called it relational rupture. When I said, I feel like I can't breathe here, he said, let's name what's constricting. I didn't want it named. I wanted it heard. That night I went home and tried to write. Something raw. Something not fit for Instagram. I typed. He never told me to be smaller. He just praised how big I already was until I got tired of having to prove it. He never silenced me. He just echoed everything I said until I couldn't hear myself anymore. I stared at the blinking cursor. Closed the tab. Went to bed. Dreamt of a version of me who didn't explain everything. Who didn't apologize mid-sentence. Who didn't date men who knew how to deconstruct patriarchy but never gave her space to feel it. I didn't break up with him. Not in the dramatic, cinematic way. No shaking hands. No final speech. No righteous storming out with "I deserve more," echoing in the hallway. I just left. Piece by piece. Like unthreading a sweater I never meant to wear. It started with texts I didn't answer right away. Then plans I let slide. Then a weekend I spent entirely offline, no explanations. When I finally saw him again, he smiled and said, "You've been quiet." I nodded. He waited, patient. Expectant. Like he thought I was about to say something profound. I didn't. Because here's the thing. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is not explain yourself. He asked if I wanted tea. I said no. He said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I don't think I want to talk tonight." He nodded. Of course he did. Consent king. Master of space holding. We sat in silence for 20 minutes. He said, "I'm sensing something shifting." I said nothing. Because what could I say? Yes, you understand me. Too well. So well that I don't recognize where I end and your validation begins. I looked at him, this man who never hurt me, never gaslit me, never crossed a boundary, and felt this strange grief. Not because I missed him, but because I'd spent months trying to be the woman he already believed I was. That's the danger of being seen too early. You start living up to the reflection instead of living inside your body. That night, when I left his apartment, I didn't say goodbye. I said, "Take care." He said, "Always." It wasn't a breakup. It was a quiet release. A letting go of someone who never really held me, just named me over and over until the words no longer meant anything. Later that week, he posted a photo of a book I'd recommended, with the caption, "Still sitting with what it means to love without asking someone to translate their pain." I didn't like it. Didn't repost. Didn't DM. Because I knew what it meant. It meant he was already turning our breakup into a metaphor. Already learning from me. Already moving on with new language. And I wasn't angry. Just tired. So I did what I always do when I don't want to be seen. I opened a blank doc and wrote. He was never cruel. Never loud. Never careless. But still, I lost myself trying to stay lovable to a man who never disagreed with me. A man who nodded so much, I forgot how to raise my voice. I didn't post it. Some truths don't need an audience. They just need to live somewhere outside your body. Raya called the next day. She asked how it ended. I said it didn't. I just left. She paused. Then, do you miss him? I said no. I miss not having to explain myself. But with him, I was always explaining, even in the silence. I walked to campus later that afternoon. Sat on the steps of the Humanities building. Watched people pass. Loud boys. Tired girls. One girl had a tote that said, "The personal is still political." I smiled. Because she was right. And because for the first time in months, I could feel my rage again, not as theory, not as content, but as mine. Raw. Uneven. Unshaped. And real.